At 4:50 a.m., Russia's most protected bridge was on fire again. But this time, it wasn't a truck bomb, it wasn't a sea drone, and it definitely wasn't an accident. Somewhere over the Black Sea, a single F-16 flew straight through what was supposed to be an impenetrable wall of Russian air defenses, dropped its payload, and vanished before breakfast. On paper, that flight should have ended in seconds. In reality, it exposed something far more dangerous than a destroyed bridge. It exposed a system that could be tricked, and a mistake that cost Moscow hundreds of millions. And this wasn't luck, it was planned down to the second. For Russia, the Crimean Bridge isn't just concrete and steel, it's a promise, a $4 billion statement that Crimea is permanently connected, protected, and untouchable. That's why every previous attack was treated as an embarrassment, but also survivable. This one was different. The damage pattern told a story Russian officials didn't want told. Twisted steel, precision impact points, structural failure in exactly the wrong place. This wasn't chaos, it was targeting, and it hinted at something Moscow had spent years insisting wasn't possible. Reports suggest Ukraine didn't just hit the bridge again, they reached into Russian-controlled airspace, challenged elite defenses, and executed a strike that relied on timing so tight that a single error would have meant total failure. But the most surprising part wasn't the bridge, it was the aircraft chosen to do the job, because the jet that flew this mission wasn't supposed to survive it. The main character of this raid was an F-16 Block 50. In Western Air Forces, it's a predator. In this situation, flying alone toward Crimea, it should have been prey. It wasn't, carrying massive bunker busters or city-leveling weapons. Instead, it carried 4 GBU-39 small-diameter bombs, light, precise, intelligent, each one designed to glide dozens of miles and hit a target with surgical accuracy. But they weren't aiming for the bridge deck. Analysis suggests the real target was far more specific, a weakened expansion joint near a support pylon already stressed from earlier damage. And even more critical than where the bombs landed was when they landed, because at the exact moment of impact, a Russian ammunition convoy was expected to be crossing that point. Hundreds of tons of artillery shells, tightly packed, rolling over a known structural weak spot. Hitting concrete would damage the bridge. Hitting that convoy would do something else entirely. On paper, this required impossible timing. In reality, it required surviving long enough to try, and that meant facing the system designed to stop missions like this before they ever begin. Guarding the bridge was Russia's S-400 Triumph, a system often described as unstoppable. Its radar can track hundreds of targets at once. Its missiles travel at hypersonic speeds. Its coverage is so wide it turns entire regions into no-fly zones. In theory, an F-16 wouldn't even get close. The radar would see it, the missiles would launch, end of story. That's why this strike shocked analysts, because the S-400 didn't fail due to weak hardware. It failed because it was overwhelmed. Reports claim Ukraine didn't try to destroy the system. They tried to confuse it, to flood it, to make it see threats that weren't real while missing the one that was. And instead of fighting one aircraft, Russian defenses suddenly found themselves reacting to dozens of contacts from the air and the sea all at once. What happened next wasn't a breakthrough in firepower, it was a breakdown in perception, and that's where the operation truly began. Instead of sending more jets, reports suggest Ukraine sent noise. Out on the Black Sea, a group of unmanned boats moved into position and did something Russian operators weren't expecting. They stopped, their hatches opened, and from their decks, dozens of small FPV drones lifted into the air. On their own, those drones would have been harmless, limited range, limited payload, easy targets. But that wasn't their job. Each one carried modified electronics designed to imitate something far more dangerous. To humanize, they were plastic toys. To Russian radar, they reportedly looked like incoming cruise missiles approaching from multiple directions at once. Suddenly, the S-400 wasn't tracking one threat, it was tracking dozens. Priority targets flooded the system. Automated filters struggled to classify what was real and what wasn't. Crews switched to manual control. Orders came fast, then faster. Guns opened up, missiles followed. And while millions of dollars worth of interceptors chased cheap cheap decoys, something important happened. Every radar dish and gun barrel tilted upward, exactly as planned. While attention was fixed on the sky, the real threat stayed low. The F-16 wasn't charging in at altitude. It was skimming the sea, flying so low that radar waves passed right over it. This wasn't stealth technology, it was geometry. At that height and distance, Earth's curvature did the hiding. Russian short-range systems couldn't see below the horizon. Long-range radar could, but only if it was looking down, and right then, it wasn't. Inside the cockpit, warnings flashed. The jet was already being painted by search radars, but not tracked. One wrong move and the illusion would collapse. The timing window was measured in seconds. As drones disappeared in fireballs above the bridge and gun crews celebrated early victories, the F-16 closed the distance untouched. Not because defenses were weak, but because they were distracted. And just as the last decoys began to fall, the situation below took a turn that changed everything. Believing the attack was over, Russian commanders made a call that would haunt them. A large logistics convoy had been waiting near the bridge, stopped as a precaution while air defenses dealt with the swarm. Heavy trucks, armored escorts, canvas-covered loads no one expected to be targeted. When the radar screens cleared and the final drones vanished, the order came through: move. What wasn't known at the time was what those trucks were carrying. Reports suggest they were loaded with massive quantities of 152mm artillery shells, packed tightly and rolling forward as a single column. Above them, the F-16 was climbing. The pilot wasn't rushing. Dropping too early would waste the strike. Too late, and the opportunity would disappear. The jet reached its pop-up point just as the heaviest part of the convoy rolled onto a known structural weak spot on the bridge. At that moment, every piece of the plan aligned. The distractions, the timing, the deception. And with Russian defenses still focused in the wrong direction, the final phase began. The moment the jet climbed, the illusion shattered. A Russian radar operator reportedly realized what had happened. The false targets vanished from the screen, and suddenly the real threat was obvious. An F-16 hanging in open air with nowhere to hide. Alarms screamed. A launch order followed. A missile tore off its rail, accelerating faster than the pilot could react. Inside the cockpit, the warning tone changed. Continuous, unforgiving. The jet rolled hard, diving back toward the sea as countermeasures poured out behind it. But this wasn't an outdated system chasing flares. The missile stayed locked. For a split second, survival came down to physics. The pilot turned perfectly across the radar beam, trying to disappear into background noise. The missile hesitated. Then it detonated. Not on the jet, but on one of the bombs already gliding toward the bridge. In an instant, half the strike was gone. That left one single GBU-39 continuing forward on its own. No guidance from the aircraft, no chance for correction from the pilot, just pre-programmed logic and momentum. The bomb adjusted for wind, slipped through smoke, and instead of striking the road, it punched through the canvas covering one of the trucks below. What happened next wasn't just an explosion. The bomb detonated inside a vehicle packed with artillery shells, triggering a chain reaction that reports describe as catastrophic. Heat, pressure, and shock rippled through the convoy, setting off load after load in rapid succession. The bridge didn't crack, it buckled. Steel lost its strength in seconds. Concrete sagged. A massive span twisted downward, turning a vital supply route into an impassable wreck. And by the time the fireball reflected off the pilot's canopy, the outcome was already decided. The jet was gone. The bridge was broken, and the cost of one mistake had just been made permanent. When the smoke cleared, the scale of the damage became impossible to hide. The rail line was warped beyond quick repair. The road span was no longer usable for heavy vehicles. What had been Russia's most reliable logistics artery into Crimea was suddenly a bottleneck, and in some areas, a dead end. Moving fuel, armor, and ammunition meant detours, delays, and exposure, and the numbers made the situation even worse. Analysts estimate Ukraine spent a fraction of the cost on this operation: cheap drones, unmanned boats, a small number of precision munitions. In return, Russia faced months of repairs, the loss of massive ammunition stockpiles, and a logistics disruption that couldn't be patched overnight. But the real impact wasn't physical, it was psychological. The strike showed that layered air defenses can be overwhelmed without destroying them, that expensive systems can be forced to look the wrong way, and that control over Crimea isn't just about territory, it's about perception. If a single aircraft can slip through once, it can happen again. And the question now isn't whether the bridge can be repaired, it's whether Russia can ever be confident it's truly safe again.